Your mother used to love to play three-card poker. And when we go in, she'd always tell me, take me to the table, know where I am, and then check on me once in a while. And she'd usually play the $10 table, whereas she would have $30 down on the board, 10, 10, and 10 in three-card poker. Sometimes I'd come back and see what's going on, and she'd probably be winning, and she'd be playing two places. 25, 25, 25, 25. So she had $150 down on each hand, and she kept winning. Your mother was a gambler. She loved the casinos. She loved to gamble. And she just was in her own mode down there. And sometimes she'd get wild, sometimes she didn't. I watched her one time, kept playing a slot machine, and kept saying it's going to hit. And I watched her pump $100 bills after $100 bills into one single slot machine, and it never did win. Your mother loved Atlantic City. It was her second home. And she would go down there every day if she could. And she just loved to gamble, sometimes recklessly, sometimes to her advantage. Your mother was very generous when she won. She would give it to the grandkids, she would give it to the kids themselves, and she'd take care of herself too. One of her first apartments was over a lawyer's office, and I got money taken off my rent because I used to clean the building, the offices in the building. And being a cop, I had the management to be able to find vacant homes, and there was a house in Fleetwood, 45 Ranger Road, that was vacant for a long time. And I went to Mr. Wytack and said, can you find out who owns that and what it would cost me to buy it? And he contacted the owner in New York City, and we met him at the house one day, and we sort of like to banter back and forth on the house. And I had $200, and every time I'd say, well, I'll buy it, he says, no, let's see what else we can do. So we never satisfied anything on our first meeting. He said he wanted to meet my children, and so he said, we'll meet next Sunday. And when we met him next Sunday at the house, he had presents for my two little children at the time, and I kept saying, well, we got to build dormers on the upstairs. And he says, how much was that going to cost you? And I said, oh, probably $2,000 or $3,000. He said, well, I'll take that off the price of the house so it doesn't cost you. And I said, I'd like to fix up the cellar, and then how much is that going to cost you? And he said, well, I'll take that off. Eventually, the house went from $15,000 down to $7,000, and I picked up the house for $7,000. Basically, the gentleman had no children, was never married, so he sort of like adopted my family as his family, and every holiday he would show up with presents for the kids. He actually bought us a washer and dryer. He would buy different things and give them as gifts to us. And then we completely lost track of the man. Never, after about 3 or 4 years, we never did hook up with him again. In those days, when you lived in a little community, everybody watched out for everybody else. You never locked your doors, you never did anything. Everybody helped one another. And if you had a swimming pool in your backyard, everybody would come over to your yard, and you go to their yard. You have barbecues together. It was more like a family affair, even though you weren't family. One of my first jobs was a police officer. And I can remember telling my children years later, they'd ask me how much I would make, and I said $2,500. And they say, was that a week or a month, Dad? And I'd say, no, that was a year. Dumont was a very small town, growing up there and then becoming a police officer. And yet we had some so-called celebrities in the town. Don Knotts lived in our town at the time when he was appearing on television shows. And then later on, I found out that Bob Papa grew up in Dumont as a kid, and he's the color accommodator, I think, for the New York Giants football. As a police officer in a small town, in my day, there was no crime, no drugs, no anything. Probably the big deal would be local kids would borrow a car from the A&P parking lot and go joyriding with it. And I'd meet them at the local soda place and say, hey guys, there's a 1959 Chevrolet borrowed from the parking lot. It's now 5 o'clock. I want to see it back in the parking lot by 7 o'clock. And lo and behold, the kids would bring it back. Well, all they wanted to do was go joyriding. And that's the truth, John. Unbelievable. I was probably different than some of the cops because I knew as a kid I did some crazy things, and so the kids did some crazy things. So all I used to do is just slap them on the wrist and tell them not to do it again, instead of bringing charges against them, and they always have that record on them. It's totally useless. You got to be a friendly cop. When I became a cop, my father was also a police officer. He was a sergeant on the police force in Dumont, and he pinned the badge on me. And one of the things he told me then is, this badge represents something. Don't go looking for trouble because that badge is going to find it real quick. I always remember that. Unbelievable. So I always remember that from my father. It was a very good piece of advice. Don't go looking for trouble. It'll find you quick enough. When we moved from California back to Point Pleasant, kind of tough. I was a little bit older, could not become a cop again, so I had to go out and work. And I worked as an electrician in the daytime, and I managed the bowling alley locally at night. And on weekends, I work on my own as an electrician, just to make money to put food on the table and a roof over the house.